At the mall, a proud man cruelly mocks and kicks out his poor ex, convinced she's still the helpless girl he once abandoned. He has no idea she is now the secret queen of the night, married to a powerful vampire king who watches everything from the shadows. By the time he realizes whom he has insulted, it's too late. His fate is already sealed in blood and darkness. Some stories shout about power with crowns and castles. This one hides its power in a quiet man in a black hoodie, walking behind his wife in a noisy, overbright mall where nobody knows his name. The air inside the mall was heavy with perfume, popcorn, and that cold metal smell from too much air conditioning. Children ran past with sticky hands and balloon strings, neon signs flickered, and somewhere, a pop song hummed above the crowd. In the middle of all that human chaos, Amina walked slowly, fingers tracing the edge of her worn canvas bag, while the man beside her moved like a shadow that had chosen to be gentle. He didn't look like a king. His hood was pulled low, dark hair falling over his forehead, hands slipped casually into his pockets. To anyone else, he was just another tall stranger, maybe a little too pale, maybe a little too quiet. But when he glanced at Amina, the hard line of his jaw softened, and centuries of loneliness faded from his eyes. "Are you tired?" he asked, his voice low and warm, the kind of voice that made even the fluorescent lights feel softer. "I'm fine," Amina said, forcing a small smile. "I used to walk this mall for hours without buying anything, just looking, just dreaming, I guess." He studied her face, catching the wobble in her smile that other people always missed. "And what did you dream of back then?" She laughed once, a sound clipped at the edges. "Not this," she said, glancing at him. "Not you." He almost smiled, but the expression didn't quite reach his eyes. "Back then, you dreamed too small." She bumped his shoulder gently with hers. Says the man hiding a crown under a hoodie. If anyone had been watching closely, they might have noticed the way people unconsciously stepped aside as he walked, how the crowd opened a little path without understanding why. They might have noticed that, for a heartbeat, the music from the speakers seemed to slow when he stopped, as if sound itself held its breath around him. But nobody was watching. And that was exactly how King Lucian preferred it. For all his titles, Lord of the Nocturnal Court, Keeper of the Old Cities, Ruler of Shadows, Amina only called him Lucian. No one here knew that the man steadying her elbow as she navigated a puddle of spilled soda had seen empires rise and fall. No one knew that the soft touch on her arm belonged to a vampire king who had sworn, on a night older than any of these bright electric lights, to never again use his power to break a human heart. They reached the center of the mall, where a wide open space yawned between glittering shop fronts. A fountain splashed lazily under an artificial sky printed on the ceiling, painted with fake clouds and a fake sunset that never changed. Amina slowed, her eyes catching on a familiar logo across the bright tile floor. Lux Mobile, Premium PHONES, Premium Life. Her breath hitched, her steps stopped. Lucian noticed instantly. Every tiny change in her body was a language he had learned to read. The way her knuckles tightened around the strap of her bag, the way her shoulders pulled in, small and defensive, like she was trying to fold herself into the smallest version of who she had once been. "Amina," he said quietly, following her gaze to the shining glass storefront, all clean lines and cold light. "What is it?" Behind the glass, salesmen in sharp suits laughed together, tapping on the newest phones. Near the back, a man in a fitted blazer, beard carefully shaped, hair slicked back with too much gel, checked his reflection in a display screen, straightened his tie, and smiled at himself. Amina swallowed hard, her heart felt loud in her own ears. "That store," she whispered. "He works there." Lucian didn't ask who. He already knew from the way the word "he" came out of her mouth, flat, almost bitter, wrapped in old hurt. "The one who called you too poor for my future?" he asked gently. She gave a short nod, eyes still locked on the glass. "Omar." The name tasted like dust in Lucian's mind. He had never met the man, but he had seen what was left in Amina's heart after him. The quiet fear whenever she had to ask for help, the way she hesitated before touching anything that looked expensive, the way she still checked price tags 3 times even when Lucian had told her more than once that in his world gold was just metal and diamonds were just stones, that her worth was not a number. "We can leave," Lucian said softly. "Right now, you owe him nothing, not your time, not your pain." For a moment, she almost agreed. They could walk away. Go eat ice cream by the fountain, go laugh at cheap sunglasses at the stand downstairs, go back to the car where the world was simple again. But something inside her, something small and stubborn and tired of being scared, refused. "I'm not that girl anymore," she murmured, half to herself. "I don't want to keep crossing the street every time I see his shadow." Lucian's eyes, dark as midnight glass, searched her face. Then he nodded, slow and respectful, like he was bowing to a queen at court. "Then I walk with you," he said, "and I stay silent unless you ask me not to." "You'll really stay quiet?" she asked, a tiny teasing note in her voice despite the storm in her stomach. "You married a vampire king, not a street fighter," he replied. "I promise to protect you, not embarrass you in front of a phone shop." Her lips curved. The joke was small, but it gave her enough courage to take the first step. Every step toward that glass storefront felt like walking backward through time. The mall hasn't changed much, she thought. Same polished floors, same fake plants, same sales banners screaming about discounts she used to calculate in her head, dividing the price by the number of extra shifts she'd have to work to afford anything. But she had changed. At least, she hoped she had. They stepped inside. Cool, artificially scented air wrapped around them, smelling faintly of plastic and expensive cologne. Bright white lights made the phones glow like little captured stars on glass shelves. "Welcome to Luxmobile," a young salesman said with a practiced smile, then did a quick double take at Lucian, as if something about him didn't quite fit the usual script. "Can I help you?" "We're just looking," Amina answered. Her voice sounded calm. That surprised her. From the back of the store, Omar noticed the slight disturbance in the perfect pattern of his afternoon. He turned, ready to judge whoever had stepped in. Were they worth his time, his charm, his sharp sales pitch? His eyes landed on Amina. For a second, he didn't recognize her. The last time he'd seen her, she'd been thinner, more tired, clothes faded from too many washes. Now she stood a little straighter. Her hair was tied back in a neat scarf, her eyes clear. Her clothes were still simple. Amina had never loved flashy things, but they were clean and chosen with care. No loud brands, no fake labels, just her. And yet, his mind did what it always did. It searched for status, labels, price tags on people. "Amina," he said, eyebrows lifting. "Wow, it's been what, 2 years?" "3," she said. He glanced at her bag, at the cheap shoes on her feet, at the way she held herself. Then he looked at Lucian, taking in the plain hoodie, the lack of a visible watch or designer logo. The quick judgment flashed in his eyes like a neon sign. Broke, not important. "You still around here?" Omar asked, voice too loud, posture widening as if he needed the whole store to see how confidently he could stand in front of his past. "Didn't think you'd come back to this mall. You used to say it made you feel small." Amina felt her throat tighten. Lucian's presence behind her was a quiet wall of warmth. "I'm just here with my husband," she said. For the first time, something sharp flickered behind Omar's eyes. He looked at Lucian again, really looked this time, searching for something that might sting his ego less. But there was nothing obvious to respect. Not the right clothes, not the right watch, not the right car keys in his hand. Omar laughed, a sound that was almost kind to anyone who didn't know him. "Husband, huh? Good for you," he said, the words smooth but the tone slightly crooked. "So, what brings you here? Looking for our budget section? We have some older models almost as good as the new ones. Almost." Lucian's jaw tightened, but he stayed silent, just as he had promised. Amina felt the tension in him, not as anger, but as something heavier, older, like a storm held back by an invisible dam. She inhaled slowly. "We're just browsing." "Of course you are," Omar replied, stepping closer. "Browsing was always your thing, you remember. You'd drag me past all these stores and say, 'One day I'll buy anything I want.'" He smiled, sharp and nostalgic at the same time. "Guess that one day isn't here yet, huh?" A couple nearby turned their heads, sensing drama. Another salesman smirked faintly. Amina felt old shame rise like a wave, that familiar burn in her cheeks, the feeling of being seen and measured and found not enough. Lucian moved then, not forward, not in aggression, but slightly closer to her side. Just enough so his arm brushed hers, grounding her. His voice stayed in his chest, but a coolness slipped into the air, almost unnoticeable, as if the temperature in the shop had dropped by a single degree. Omar leaned against the counter, owning the space like a stage. "Anyway," he said, waving a dismissive hand, "if you're not buying, you can't stand here all day. We're busy. Customers who actually spend money, you know." He turned his gaze to Lucian, eyes traveling from the hoodie to the plain black sneakers. "Bro, if you can't afford it, no shame in saying so. There's a cheaper place on the ground floor. They sell simpler stuff. Might be more your level." He stepped aside and pointed toward the door with the tip of his polished shoe, the movement casual but sharp, almost like a little kick aimed at their dignity. As he did, his foot nudged Amina's bag, knocking it over. The zipper slipped open and everything spilled, her small notebook, a half-open packet of biscuits, a cheap lipstick, a folded grocery list. They scattered across the shiny white floor. For a split second, the whole store seemed to pause. Each item on that floor felt like a piece of her life exposed. The discount biscuit she still bought out of habit, even though she didn't have to anymore. The notebook where she scribbled ideas for the small charity project she'd been too shy to tell anyone about. The old grocery list from a time when every price felt like a door that wouldn't open. "Oops," Omar said lightly, not even bending down. "You should keep your things together, Amina. This is a premium space." Heat rose behind her eyes. The old Amina would have apologized. She would have rushed to gather everything, mumbling, shrinking, trying to disappear. But before she could move, Lucian was already kneeling. The king of the night, ruler of cities that slept under ancient stars, lowered himself onto the shiny, overlit mall floor without a second's hesitation. He picked up her notebook with careful fingers, as if it were made of glass. He brushed dust from her grocery list like it was something precious, not something the world threw away without reading. When he looked up at her, his eyes were soft, but deep inside them something else stirred, old, cold, and powerful, like the bottom of a dark ocean suddenly remembering its storms. "You don't kneel," Amina whispered, her voice shaking, not from fear of him, but from the strange tenderness of it. "Not for me, not here." "For you," he said quietly, "I kneel anywhere." A hush fell over the space immediately around them, like the air itself was listening. He rose, placing her things back into her bag with almost ceremonial care. Then he turned to Omar, finally meeting his eyes properly. There was no raised voice, no dramatic gesture, just a calm, unblinking gaze that seemed to look straight through the expensive blazer, straight through the practiced smirk, and into the small, frightened place inside Omar that he hid even from himself. "You just kicked the only person in this room who ever truly cared for you," Lucian said softly, his words measured, almost gentle. "And you don't even realize what you've done." A faint shiver passed through the store lights. For a moment, they flickered, shadows stretching a little too long across the floor. Omar swallowed, his confident smile faltering for the first time, as if his body sensed a danger his mind could not name. Who are you?" Omar managed to ask, voice losing its glossy smoothness. Lucian tilted his head, a slow, almost sad movement. The centuries in his eyes seemed to deepen, the thin mask of ordinary human melting away at the edges. Amina felt her heart pound. She knew that look. It was the look he wore when the past he tried to bury began to rise. Without taking his gaze off Omar, Lucian reached for her hand and gently intertwined his fingers with hers, as if anchoring himself. "You don't want the answer to that," he murmured. The air grew heavier, thicker, charged with something invisible. A child outside the store tugged at their mother's sleeve, suddenly uneasy. Somewhere in the mall, the music skipped a beat. And standing there in the harsh white light, between glowing phones and polished tiles, Amina realized with a cold, breathtaking clarity that Lucian was closer than he had been in years to breaking the one promise he had sworn to himself. He was one heartbeat away from revealing exactly what kind of king she had married. The heartbeat that separated Lucian from the past he had sworn to bury stretched out like an entire night. The store was too bright, too white, every reflection on every screen a little knife of light. Somewhere behind the back wall, a small fan buzzed. The fountain outside kept splashing its fake, looping waterfall song, and inside his chest, something ancient shifted. Amina felt it before she saw it. His fingers around her hand went colder, just by a degree. The familiar warmth of him, steady, grounding, pulled inward, like a tide before a wave. "Lucian," she whispered, just his name, nothing more. The sound of it hooked into him like an anchor. He blinked once, and the shadows that had gathered for him in the corners of the room hesitated. Across from them, Omar tried to laugh off his own flicker of unease. "What's this?" he said, throwing his voice so it carried to the other employees. "You bringing your new man to remember what you missed out on. There's a return policy, you know. You can still upgrade." One of the younger salesmen snorted. Another ducked his head, ashamed to find it funny. Lucian finally spoke, his tone so calm it made the insult sound small by comparison. "You work in a place full of glass, and you still haven't learned that everything reflects," he said quietly. "Every word you throw at her, you're throwing at yourself first." Omar's jaw tightened. "Look, I don't know who you think you are." "I know who you think you are," Lucian replied. "And I know who you're afraid you might still be." The sentence landed in the air between them, heavy and too direct. Omar opened his mouth for a sharp comeback, but the words tangled with a sudden, inexplicable tightness in his throat. Before he could recover, a voice cut in from the side. "Is there a problem here?" A stocky security guard stood at the entrance, hand resting near his radio. Behind him, the store manager hovered, a woman in her 40s with tired eyes and a blazer a little too tight at the shoulders, like she grew out of it but couldn't afford a new one yet. Omar straightened quickly, putting on his professional face like armor. "Yes," he said, gesturing toward Amina and Lucian. "They're blocking the entrance, making a scene, and they dropped their things everywhere. This is a premium environment. I've asked them to leave." Every word was technically true, and yet the truth in it had been stripped bare and replaced with something pale and hollow. The guard's gaze went straight to Lucian. It usually did in situations like this. The taller man, the unreadable one, the possible threat. Lucian felt the familiar path opening in front of him. Let them blame him. Let them ask him to walk away, take the weight onto himself so Amina wouldn't have to carry it. It was the easiest solution. It had always been easier to be misunderstood than to watch someone he loved be humiliated. But out of the corner of his eye, he saw Amina's shoulders. She wasn't shrinking. She wasn't hiding behind him. She stood fixed in place, fingers pressed so tightly to the strap of her bag that her knuckles had gone pale. Something inside him shifted again, not the old anger, but a sharper respect. "Amina," he said softly, still watching the guard, "do you want to go?" Her mouth opened, then closed. The old answer, yes, of course, "Let's just go" rose to her lips like a habit. Then she remembered how often she had walked away in silence, carrying words that ate at her later like invisible moths. "No," she heard herself say, surprising even herself. Her voice shook, but it carried. "I want to say what happened." The manager glanced from them to Omar, calculating risk, cost, reputation in one rapid scan. Other customers had started pretending to browse nearby displays, their reflections lined up on the glowing screens, every one of them listening. The security guard shifted his weight, less certain now. "Ma'am," he asked, trying for neutral, "did something happen?" Amina drew in a breath that scraped down her throat like dry air. "He kicked my bag," she said. "Everything fell out. He didn't help. He made fun of me. He told us to leave because we don't look like we can afford anything here." There it was, laid bare under the bright white lights. Not shouted, not dramatized, just spoken. Omar scoffed. "Oh, come on, I barely touched it. She's exaggerating. We have rules. Customers can't just hang around." Lucian watched the manager carefully. This was always the pivot point in human places like this. Who would be believed, who would be made small? He could feel her pulse from here, a quick flutter under a thin layer of perfume. He could smell her conflict, a mix of fear, ambition, old tired hope of one day being manager of more than just a phone store. "Is that what happened?" she asked Omar, her tone warned him. "You'd better answer me well." He lifted his hands. "Look, you know how tight corporate is about conversions. They're obviously not buying. I was just direct, that's all." The guard cleared his throat. "Even so, sir, there's no need to embarrass anyone. We can ask people to move politely." Most people never notice the small moments when a life quietly changes direction. They remember the big speeches, the tears, the crises. But often it's these: one security guard deciding not to look away, one manager deciding not to protect her favorite employee at any cost. Lucian felt a strange, quiet pride in a man he had never met. The choice to be fair might have seemed small to the guard, but to Amina it would echo for a long time. The manager pressed her lips together. For a heartbeat, it looked like she might smooth everything over, laugh, call it a misunderstanding. But the phones mirrored her face back at her, 100 little screens showing the same pinched expression. That was the thing about glass. It didn't let her look away from herself. She turned to Amina. "I'm sorry he spoke to you that way," she said slowly. "No matter what you're buying or not buying, he had no right to insult you. Omar, step into the back a minute." Omar's mask cracked. "What? You're taking their side. You know how many phones I move every week. I keep this place alive." "And I am trying to keep its reputation alive," she replied tightly. "Go, now." The guard stepped a little closer, just enough to make the choice clear. Omar swung his gaze back to Amina, his eyes hard and glittering. "This is what you wanted, isn't it?" he snapped. "To finally see me put in my place because you couldn't handle mine. You haven't changed, Amina. Still standing in expensive stores, still not buying anything, still acting like the world owes you." He broke off, looking for the cruelest weapon he had. He found it in the past, as people often do. "Remember how you begged me to lend you money so you could buy a second-hand phone," he said, voice rising. "You cried because you said you were ashamed to always be the only one in the group with a broken screen. Please, Omar, I'll pay you back." He laughed, but there was no joy in it. "Took you months. Every time I saw you, you looked a little smaller. I did you a favor. I showed you your place." The words hit Amina like a slap made of memories. Cold nights counting coins on her bed, skipping lunch to save bus fare, smiling at friends whose phones flashed like small pieces of power they could hold in their hands. The raw, burning humiliation of asking someone who claimed to love her for help and then paying for it with her dignity. Her stomach knotted, her eyes blurred. For a moment, the mall vanished and she was that girl again, walking carefully so her worn-out shoes wouldn't split, terrified of owing anyone anything. Lucian felt every tremor in her, every ghost of those old nights. Something in his chest tore through the last of its restraint. He stepped forward, not aggressively, not rushing, but with the slow, absolute certainty of someone who had already decided. The air seemed to thicken around him, as if even the light had gained weight. The manager's frown deepened. The guard's hand edged closer to his radio. Amina squeezed his fingers once, a silent question. "What are you doing?" "I promised you I would not embarrass you," Lucian said to her, and his voice was soft enough that only she truly heard the apology in it. "But there is a difference between anger and truth, and I won't let him chain you to who you used to be." He turned fully to Omar. The store fell strangely quiet, as if every sound had been turned down one notch. The hum of the lights, the distant music, the chatter from the corridor outside, still there, but muffled, like someone had partially closed a door on the world. "You think you put her in her place," Lucian said, "but the only person who has been trapped by that old story is you." Omar rolled his shoulders back, trying to laugh it off again. "What are you, some kind of motivational speaker in discount sneakers?" Lucian didn't smile. "Look at me," he said. It wasn't loud. It wasn't a command kicked like a stone. It was more like a hand extended across a dark river. Omar's eyes met his, irritated, ready to mock, and then could not look away. He saw nothing dramatic. No glowing red pupils, no monstrous fangs. Just eyes so dark they held no clear color, with a strange, thin ring of silver around the edge, like moonlight caught on the rim of a deep well. For a heartbeat, Omar had the dizzy sense that if he leaned too close, he would fall in. "What are you doing?" Omar tried to say, but the words came out hoarse. Lucian took one more step, closing the space until they were almost the same height, almost breath to breath. The overhead lights flickered again, or maybe it was just the way pupils expanded to drink in more than they were meant to see. "Most people," Lucian murmured, "spend their whole lives running from the one memory that built the cage around their heart. The one moment they decided they would rather be cruel than be small. You built your whole personality on top of that. Do you even remember when it was?" Omar's lips parted. Behind his eyes, something trembled. He did remember. A shop not so different from this one, years ago. A man behind a counter who had smiled at him like he was dirt. Lucian's voice dropped to a whisper only Omar could truly hear. "Let me show you what you've been carrying," he said. "Or keep pretending you're free. You get to choose." Omar swallowed. His fingers, resting on the glass counter, had gone white at the knuckles. "Show me what?" He forced out, the last word barely air. Lucian's answer was not in his voice this time, but in the sudden, unnatural stillness that wrapped around them, as if the second hand on the security guard's watch had decided to rest between one tick and the next. And in that suspended breath of the world, without a single drop of blood or a raised fist, the vampire king gently reached for the locked door inside Omar's mind and pushed it open. The first thing Omar noticed was the smell. Not the cool plastic-can cologne air of Luxmobile, but the heavy, humid scent of too many bodies in too little space. Sweat, cheap deodorant, hot dust. The faint sweetness of frying oil drifting in from somewhere outside. He blinked, and the glass counter in front of him was no longer clean and glowing. It was scratched and dirty, covered with a stained plastic cloth that had once been white. Instead of new flagship phones lined up in neat rows, there were 3 older models tied to cables, their screens smudged and cracked from too many hands. His own reflection in the glass was smaller, thinner, 15, maybe 16 years old, acne along his jaw, a t-shirt with a faded logo and sleeves that hung slightly crooked because one had been stitched back on by hand. "What?" he whispered, but his voice sounded younger now, too. Across the counter, a man in a tight shirt and fake designer belt rolled his eyes. "I told you yesterday, kid. Price went up," he said. You don't lock in, it's not my problem. Inflation, you know. Please, the younger Omar said. His hands were empty. His pockets were full of nothing but lint and the memory of the coins he wished were there. You said if I brought half today, you'd keep it for me. You promised. The man laughed, loud and dismissive. Promised? To who? You and your broken sneakers. He leaned closer, eyes narrowing. Look around you, boy. Does this look like a charity? The shop was cramped and hot. Other teenagers pushed past, tapping the display phones, laughing, recording themselves with front cameras that worked. Behind him, someone snickered. Look at his phone, a voice whispered. Screen's more cracked than my grandma's heels. Heat flared in Omar's cheeks. He clutched the old phone in his hand tighter. The spiderweb of cracks across its screen made everything behind them look broken too. His friends teased him about it, but they still shared videos with him, still squeezed him into the frame when they filmed themselves. But lately, more and more, they were drifting toward people like the man behind the counter. People who could offer them shiny metal badges of belonging. I can get the rest, young Omar insisted. Just give me until the end of the week, my dad. At the mention of his father, the man's expression turned sour. Your dad, he scoffed. The one who came here begging for a discount last month, said he needed a phone for work, remember? Told me, please, brother, my boss only sends details on messages now. He lifted his voice, mocking the pleading tone Omar remembered all too well. You should have seen him almost crying over a model that's already 3 years old. A memory slammed into Omar, his father at their tiny kitchen table, counting notes with rough, tired hands, tracing the price on a flyer carefully, lips moving silently. Saying, it's all right, Habibi, we'll get there, just a few more shifts. Your mother doesn't need new shoes yet. The man's next words were like salt rubbed into that image. I gave him the discount, you know why, he said loudly, glancing over Omar's shoulder